Hello, and welcome to She Leads Biotech, the podcast that celebrates women leaders in the bioscience space. I'm your host, Sharon Cox, CEO and Managing Director of CNA International, based right here in New York. And each week I'll be talking to women leaders about their work, their triumphs and challenges, providing invaluable insight into how women can unlock their superpowers and succeed on their own terms. So whether you're navigating your own career path in bioscience or you're passionate about science and innovation, I hope you're empowered and inspired by each episode. My guest today is a neurobiologist and professor of molecular medicine and neuroscience at the Scripps Research Institute. She's also the co-founder of Myosin Therapeutics, whose treatment for a methamphetamine use disorder is creating quite a stir. Her work is fascinating and her journey even more so. So please join me in welcoming Myosin CEO, Courtney Miller. Courtney!
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. Beautiful background. Where in the world are you? You look like you're in deepest, darkest Africa or something with all...
It's definitely tropical outside.
It does look it.
Yes, I'm in Jupiter, which is about a little over an hour north of Miami.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
Yes. And a lovely Miami day. So obviously the bad weather has moved on elsewhere.
we were fortunate. It passed well above us in sort of a diagonal. South Florida was protected.
Oh, thank goodness for that. Well, I think it's actually heading its way here. It looks dreadful outside in New York. So, but there
Yeah.
you go. Well, listen, I really appreciate you joining us, and I know very little about you. I'll be honest. So, tell me your journey. How did everything start for you?
Well, so I'm a neuroscientist, and I've been fascinated by the brain for from very early in life. So I ended up going to get a PhD in neuroscience, where I studied mechanisms of memory because it just fascinates me, sort of how we think and remember. And so from then I went on to do some postdoctoral training. And then I started at Scripps Research on the campus in Florida, because they're really well known for drug discovery and development, spinning off companies, things like that. So while it's an academic setting, it's much more sort of, I guess, covering the realm more into industry. So I've been there since late 2009. So for quite a while, just here in
Hmm?
Jupiter.
So you haven't had to go far.
No,
That
no, we're happy living here. I'm a California native, and so this has a lot of the nice things about California that I love.
that makes complete sense. And in 2009, something happened that sent you on your journey in creating myosin, right?
Yeah, it was the following year. I mean, when you're first setting up your lab, it's like, you walk into empty benches, kind of like starting a company, and you just have to start from scratch. So we were up and running, within a few months. And so probably middle of 2010, we got this really unexpected result. We were studying the mechanisms that drive motivation to seek drugs related to substance use disorder, better known as addiction. And so these were in basic research studies, and we just discovered that delivering this inhibitor of a protein called non-muscle myosin 2, it just made the animals no longer interested in methamphetamine. And it,
Oh,
it was really unexpected, a single administration, and it was long lasting. So for at least a month, which in an animal's lifespan for the types of animals we're working with is a very long time. And because there are no FDA approved medications for methamphetamine use disorder, we were really excited about the potential. And so was the NIH.
right. So how has that progressed now? Where are you at with that now?
Yeah, so I mean, drug development is a long journey, but let's see, in 2016, our team was awarded a Blueprint Neurotherapeutics Program Award. And that's from the NIH, and it's designed to help neuroscientists like myself bridge that gap, especially in areas that industry isn't typically operating. And at the time, neuro was totally off the table in industry. because of, so many failures with Alzheimer's and things like that. And magic bullet, large populations didn't seem like it was going to be doable. So the NIH was really trying to support and train academic neuroscientists. Unfortunately, most academic neuroscientists don't have the expertise around them to really do medications development. But at Scripps, I had exactly that. So I teamed up with a couple of my colleagues, Pat Griffin and Ted Kamenika, who actually came from industry to Scripps. They were at places like Merck before that.
Right.
So they had real, true drug development chops. And so the three of us teamed up and we got this Blueprint Award. And that was to take sort of a starting compound that targets this myosin protein and develop it into an actual medication. And so we've been working on that since 2016, and we should be entering the clinic next year. We'll be filing an IND because this is a first in class, so this will be first in human. So we'll be filing the IND next month on that.
Excellent. Oh, fingers crossed.
Yeah, we're really excited.
And I know from clients that I have and candidates that I speak to, but neuroscience has really moved into the forefront now over recent years, right? And certainly the stuff coming out of Lilly in terms of the Alzheimer's, they've got some very promising areas for Alzheimer's. So that must be putting the spotlight on anything within neuroscience now. Would that be the case?
It's starting to move in that direction. Certainly Alzheimer's has really taken off again, which is great to see. And then I would say it jumps from Alzheimer's right down to rare disorders and skips over much of what's in the middle. There are a few examples, of course, but there's a lot of room within neuroscience to still kind of jump in and grow. And I think that we're starting to understand the brain so much better that neuropsychiatric disorders like substance use disorder is becoming more tractable.
Right.
Where we can, really go after it with a medication rather than, throwing out something dirty and like, lithium and saying it works. We don't know why. We're understanding the why behind things so we can really do smart development.
And there's also a lot behind that because I know not the same thing, but like alcohol addiction for so many years, people with alcohol problems would just stop. That's all you need to do. Just stop.
Right?
What's the matter with you? And the same with drug addiction. I think that came very much from the whole oxy thing where people didn't set out to be drug addicts, but unfortunately when something takes hold and then I guess changes the brain thing from there. You can tell, can't you? I'm not an expert in this matter, but I do listen and try to learn on various things. So the potential for what you're doing is huge. That somebody could potentially take a treatment that just switches off that part of the brain that has this desire. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And there are a couple of factors. So, yes, there still is stigma around use disorders, whether it's alcohol, opioids, stimulants, etc., that you're talking about. It still exists. And unfortunately, while the field is starting to make progress, we don't yet have the ability to identify, say, underlying genetic factors to predict who will develop a use disorder and who won't. For instance, prescription opioids, who is it safe for, who is it not, beyond, a very short-term prescription. Once we figure that out, that's going to be really helpful. But for those that do develop a use disorder, we really do need options. And again, for something like methamphetamine, there are no options. Currently, it's just, abstinence support in recovery programs, behavioral modification therapies, et cetera. So what we're finding is absolutely what you said. Drugs of abuse change the brain. So it no longer becomes a matter of willpower. There is changes to parts of the brain like the amygdala, which regulates emotional memories, that can be activated faster and override the prefrontal cortex, which is what's responsible for decision making. So it becomes an immediate kind of knee-jerk response of going out and seeking drugs, even if you know that it's not going to be good for you, because you've shut off the decision making. So what we found with MT110, which is what we're developing for methamphetamine use disorder, is that it resets that brain plasticity that was driving that override. It resets it so that your decision-making brain regions can come back online and control the behavior. The idea is to sort of give control back to an individual so that they can have that kind of stop and think and make the decisions. And then couple that with all of the existing therapies to really support them.
That's incredible. That really is incredible. So, what have you got to do to make this happen? You've got to go and raise millions and millions and millions of dollars, right?
It is very expensive. It's
It
true.
is expensive. So,
Yes.
what does that process look like? What's the journey for somebody to take this concept and actually make it a reality?
Yeah, so some of our journey would be a shared one that many people would experience, and parts of it are also really unique because of the disorders, diseases that we are trying to develop treatments for. So our process has been, we received that NIH award, which was actually really fantastic because it covered the cost of all of the additional initial medicinal chemistry campaign through IND enabling studies and covering the cost of a first in human phase 1 trial. So that's really, really valuable. And the reason, again, that programs like that exist is that it can be difficult to raise money for an early stage company for an area like stimulant use disorder. So in addition to that Blueprint program, NIH encouraged us to found a company. And so we did that in 2020. And the reason for that is that you can then access NIH small business investment programs.
Yep.
And so we did that. So we founded Myosin at the end of 2020 and then successfully competed for, it's called a fast track SBIR. Which is 3 years of funding from NIDA, which is the branch of NIH that works on developing treatments for substance use disorder. And so that was really helpful in getting us further along. And so when we put those two together, that has gotten us our package for, the IND complete.
Right.
But then in terms of the company's kind of overall growth, one thing that we've also done, because again, substance use disorder is a really difficult area to raise money around, we teamed up with a collaborator at Mayo Clinic, Dr. Steve Rosenfeld. So he's a physician scientist who studies these same targets that we've been developing medications for in his lab in the context of glioblastoma, which is a really aggressive form of brain cancer.
Yep.
Very aggressive, right? And so there are no effective treatments. 95% of people have passed away within 5 years of diagnosis. So it's a huge problem. But not only does he do this research, but he's also a practicing neuro-oncologist. So he treats patients at the same time. So he has a really good understanding of what's needed in the GBM field. Okay, so we were introduced, and it turns out he'd been working on these same targets in his lab in the context of glioblastoma, something massively different from substance use disorder. But there are some overlapping kind of mechanisms at the actual cellular level. So we went back into our library of compounds that we had made when we were developing MT110 from the medicinal chemistry campaign, and we found a compound that had the perfect profile for glioblastoma and began collaborating with him. And we're getting really, really exciting efficacy data in preclinical models. And so what we are also now doing is developing MT15 for glioblastoma or malignant gliomas. And raising money around cancer is actually much easier.
Right.
And so sort of a compliment. And, it's unfortunate because these are, populations of people that are in equal need because, the rise in accidental overdose deaths to methamphetamine, often because of combination with fentanyl, whether intentional or unknown,
Yep.
is really off the charts. So we're talking about two lethal diseases. But what we're doing is moving MT110 ahead with government support, and then MT125 with a combination of government support. The NIH has also been really supportive, particularly NCI, but also through private investment. And so that has been going out and doing sort of the traditional fundraising path.
And I guess what that extends your pipe, so you've got a bigger pipeline with more assets really in there. And who knows? I mean, as you progress with it, it flips and suddenly can help something else, right? That you find, I just find it so fascinating that there are things that suddenly, and they can just become amazing things. So congratulations. I think it's amazing what you and your team are doing. So, what will the challenges be for you as a woman biotech person? What are those challenges going to be around fundraising, if there are any for you?
Sure. Yeah, no, there are definite challenges. Some as a woman, probably specific to being a woman, but many more just inherent to where we're at and what we're working on.
Yep.
So, I think that private investment, venture capital is picking up. There's been a lot of M&A activity as well. So I
Yep.
would say, generally speaking, things are improving. We were out doing our seed raise when things were really at their most challenging in late 22,
Yes.
mid
Yes,
22
the
to
happy
the
days. Not.
exactly. Yes. We like to think of that as sort of it's made us stronger. So we were successful in raising a seed round in those really, really tough times. And it also encouraged us to operate in a very lean way. So, during the COVID years, there were companies that were getting, $100 million placed in their laps and saying, run with it. But
Yep.
it's difficult to grow a company that big, that fast, and to do it right. And I
Yep.
think, we're seeing the consequences of that for a number of companies.
Yeah.
So for us, we're working lean and we're doing exactly what we need to do. And every dollar is considered when we go to spend it. And so when you combine that with NIH, we're able to really stretch it out, which is good. Now, that being said, we've chosen two areas, as I've said, are like hugely unmet needs, but they're not the most appealing early stage for investors. So glioblastoma is also an area that can give pause to investors at the early stage. Because I think there have been a lot of attempts in GBM with drugs that were just not well suited.
Mm.
And so that has created kind of a hesitancy among investors that, we have to deal with. And so for that, the approaches that we're taking is also, again, leveraging government funding because there are, many both companies in pharma and large, blue chip VCs that are going to be very interested once soon as we get clinical data.
Yep.
And they said that.
Yep.
So, we're working on piecing things together. There are a lot of foundations, for instance, that have venture arms that are really focused on cancers, for instance,
Yep.
that are working with us. So that's helping us get to that inflection point, which should happen next year, mid-year.
Right.
Yeah.
You're
So
ready to go.
we're getting there. Yeah. And then
Yay.
also moving into other cancers that are more appealing, so to speak.
Oh, then. Oh, have you got one that's appealing? Have you got a sexy cancer, or it's a horrible thought?
It is, yes. So we're fighting hard for the GBM people out there, but following behind with data in things like pancreatic, which also looks really promising. So that helps to, I think, balance the perceived risk.
Excellent. And again, continues to expand your pipeline as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
oh, well, one of the important things is very much a networking aspect. And I've spoken to a number of people about networking, and some people saw it as a challenge with COVID that networking tended to put down. I didn't actually see that. I just think it moved onto a different platform. And for me, actually, was pretty good in being able to network with people in different states and meet people in different states. And a lot of companies suddenly found, well, why do we need to recruit somebody in a very expensive state when we can actually do something closer? So from that perspective, it was very good. I do accept that that is still a challenge that is happening. And women tend to be or what's been found is that women tend to be less inclined to do much networking,
Yeah.
or as much networking as other people do. Is that something you've found? Is that a
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're describing. So first, I would say my experience has been similar to yours with the result of COVID. What I often say is one of the only good things to come out of COVID has been the democratization of the investment seeking process, so to
Yep.
speak. And so, yes, it allows me in South Florida to have the same meetings that someone located in Boston or the Bay Area has,
Yep.
because it's through Zoom. There are downsides to that, though. It's not quite the same. Having had experiences where I can compare head to head, personal meetings in, face to face versus through Zoom, you absolutely make better connections with potential investors by having them in person. Some of the
Sure.
most success we've had have been with people we've met in person. So that is definitely not quite the same. That being said, I think on balance, it's definitely better what we have now, because I fully agree with your other point in terms of being able to be located wherever you want. I'm a Bay Area native, and it was so expensive then, and it's even more so now, that while you may have access to perhaps more funds if you had your company located there, it's so much more expensive that we can stretch our dollars in South Florida much further.
Yep.
So I think it works out well. Now, on the networking side, as a woman, I also fully understand what you're describing. So I think that perhaps it comes at different stages in a person's career. But so when I was finishing my postdoctoral training, also got training in technology ventures. And I discovered I loved that. And that was, the basis of venture capital, right? So I applied for the Kauffman Fellows Venture Capital Program and had to go out to the Bay Area. And it was like intensive interviews, cocktail hours, where walked into a room and it's filled with like men that are like intensely confident in themselves, right?
Yep.
And totally comfortable there. And I did not. But it was like, feet to the fire, thrown into the flames. I figured it out fast. And I'm really appreciative of that experience because it got me comfortable, so that once I made it through that process, there was no room that I now walk into where I don't feel comfortable. And so, I think you just have to get over that hump, right? And realize that there's no reason to feel intimidated, and you just need to have, if it's a quiet confidence, that's fine. But that the benefits of having those conversations, initiating those conversations with people that might be uncomfortable, are well worth it. And so that has helped me, throughout my career since that time, because it's not easy.
And it's a little bit of faking it till you make it kind of
Yeah,
thing, isn't it?
I
I
agree.
remember again when I first started my career, and the people who made the decisions in terms of recruiting were men, and they had things in the UK. I don't know if they have them here in the US, but they had things called the Chamber of Commerce, where you could go along and have a glass of wine and meet with people. And we
Yeah.
used to call it the Chamber of Horrors, because it really was very much that you kind of walk in, and perceptively very confident men all chatting to each other, and whether it's the latest soccer scores or what somebody's golf number is. I don't even know what that
Yeah.
means. Yeah, what's your handicap? That's it, sort of thing. You kind of, I found for me it was a case of like, okay, all right, then we go. Hey, lovely to meet you. The good old handshake. And I did find though that it was a perception, because I, to this day, have amazing relationships with clients 20, 30 years ago, who they were so helpful and so accommodating. And it's just that fear factor, isn't it? It's just like, well, but what? And I really want to get across to women. I've certainly noticed on LinkedIn that women tend to do much less in terms of posting and telling their stories. They'll post if it's about the latest, our drug trial has achieved XYZ or whatever, and so yay, congratulations. But far less about them as people, and so that people can get to know them more, and then in long term be more helpful. Found this very, as I say, the last couple of years have been a bit challenging all round, and certainly there have been more people actively looking, as opposed to, well, I might if the right opportunity comes up.
Sure.
And those people that I've been speaking to where I've said, look, it's challenging for me right now, obviously. So how can I help you to build your own connections and build your own brand? And the men that I spoke to about this really kind of picked it up and ran with it. And I was watching them posting things about fishing, and they'd done this and just create a real, but the
Yeah.
women that I spoke to seemed far less confident about doing it. And I'm very keen to dispel that myth. So I think if there is anybody listening to this who's thinking about how do I network more effectively, there are certainly ways to do that. And it's not as scary as we all think it's going to be.
Yeah. So I hosted, every year there's an annual meeting for the Society of Neuroscience. It's like 33,000 neuroscientists that all descend on one city. And there is a women's luncheon every year. And I hosted a panel at that luncheon one year. And I was handed the topic, effective self-promotion. And then I had to figure out how to, create a panel around that. And we ended up with a thesis that being a known quantity is a really underlying piece to successful promotion. And so I think that fits with what you're describing, is that if you are trying to reach people outside of your local area, creating an online narrative about who you are, what you're doing is well worth it, because you become known to people. They
Yep.
feel like they understand who you are, where you're coming from, and what you're doing. And that begins to sort of replace those personal relationships that maybe used to happen when it was, business was done more locally.
Yep.
So it's not easy. And there is that line, how different people are more effective at finding that line of effectively self-promoting themselves versus going overboard, because that
Yes.
obviously is not good. And I think women worry so much about the latter
Yep.
that it's not often that it happens. There's a particular, phenotype where it does. But for most part, they really do know where to find it. But it involves stretching yourself, as you were saying. You have to get outside of your comfort zone in order to do it, because people aren't going to come to you.
Yep.
And as a woman I'm not much of a self-promoter. And so I'm used to being underestimated when people initially size me up. But then when they begin to work with me, they very quickly change their tune. And this is based on feedback they've given me, right?
Yep.
And so I think, it's knowing those things and hearing that feedback to sort of internalize your own confidence and realize that, I have just as much to bring to the table, if not more, than, maybe a male colleague sitting next to me. Except that if you were to hear them talking their game, you would never guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think it's not being afraid to talk to your peers about that, and almost admitting, I've got this event to go to and I have no clue what to do or how to approach it, and what do you think about how to approach it, and just getting people's different perspectives. I know you were there at the Bio 2024
Oh, yeah.
convention in San Diego. You were on a panel there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What was that talking about?
That was talking about sort of where we're at with developing and addressing substance use disorder.
Right.
Yeah, and so there was someone from a patient advocacy, treatment perspective,
Yep.
therapeutics, et cetera. Yeah.
And what were the takeaways from that particular panel? Are there any takeaways you could share on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a lot of conversation around stigma and how that is holding back progress. And unfortunately, with substance use disorder, you get stigma from multiple sides,
Yep.
right? It's from sort of outside communities, but it even occurs within as well, where there's a sort of a contingent that advises against using medications as a treatment,
Yep.
which is problematic, right? You wouldn't tell someone with diabetes, which is also a chronic disorder, that they shouldn't be taking insulin.
Uh-huh.
So that's a barrier to overcome. And then, of course, there's the obvious stigmas from the outside. And other takeaways are just sort of, where we're at. I actually just recently published with some colleagues a review looking at the pipeline for use disorder therapeutics, and it is really thin, sadly. And Also, I think talking about how the NIH's role, and what they're doing, especially at NIDA,
Yep.
to try to improve things.
But the only way is up.
Yes, absolutely.
So what does the future look like for you? I mean, obviously you've got a lot going on. This very exciting route that you're on. In 5 years' time, what would you love to be able to look back and say, boom, there was that?
So I love running Myosin. We have an amazing team, and it really is a team that works very closely together. It's not it's a pretty flat structure, very collaborative, and so it's just fun and it's super effective. So I want to continue doing this and pushing Myosin forward. 5 years from now, I'd like to have successfully brought 110 and 125 into the clinic. Based on timelines, it's very feasible that we could have approval in GBM for MT125. And I would
Wow.
love to see that because there's such a huge need in that community.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. I know you're very busy, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. I've just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. But just as a parting piece, what advice would you give to somebody out there listening now who's keen to get something moving, who in some way wants to develop a career in the biospace?
Two. So one is seeking out and taking every opportunity that crosses your path, so long as you're not stretching yourself too thin, right? So that you can't manage it. But
Yep.
the truth of the matter is, I can say from personal experience that I never would have connected point A in my career to point D, maybe where I am right now. There's no way that I could have predicted this is what I would be doing now, including, cancer research, right? And so, but if I look back, it's small decisions I made along the way of taking something on, an experience like the Kaufman and the venture capital training, things like that,
Yep.
that at the time, like I had no idea, but it seemed interesting. And that has really prepared me for what I'm doing now. So I think it's taking those opportunities along the way. And then the other just goes back to what we were talking about earlier, because this is the other piece of advice that I regularly give when I'm, talking to trainees, is to create that narrative around who you are and take advantage of your network. Don't feel like you're over asking by talking with people that you know, because you will be surprised consistently and pleasantly by how willing people are to help and sort of bring people up the ladder behind them,
Yep.
and to connect you to their connections. And then it just grows from there.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's so important for people to realize that what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody says, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you, in
Yeah.
which case you respect that, but so few times that happens.
And how
So
much did that no really cost you? It was an email exchange, right? And
yeah,
so if you can internally handle a no and just move to the next one, like you haven't lost anything. You've only set yourself up to gain.
exactly. You should spend a year in recruitment and then you'll be well used to getting lots of no's. But there you go. Well, listen, thank you again so much for your time. I wish you every success. I'm very excited to follow the success of Myosin, and what you're looking to achieve. And hopefully we can meet again
Yeah.
and we can have a cocktail or two. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Take care. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. She Leads Biotech is brought to you by CNA International USA, a woman-owned boutique search firm based in New York. If you're looking to hire talent for your company or want support in achieving your career goals, please reach out to me at contact@cnaint.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And remember, the success of every woman should be an inspiration to another. So don't be afraid to share yours. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.